Thank you, Mary Lou. Can you hear me in the back? Okay? Yes? No? Okay. So logistical issues here. Time with me is always a problem. I get sidetracked, and so we had a run through the third one this morning, and it was an hour before I'd shown the first slide. So even though Caroline is not speaking, trust me, the success of this evening is due to Caroline and her cutting room floor. So we were going to start with me dancing to Toto's Africa, but you were making so much noise in there that I'm really It really would be worth going through this whole thing because it's great, but we don't have time. So, before I launch into this, I just want to say that this jambalaya has absolutely nothing to do with Africa. I happen to have two of them. And this one I use when the laser pointer doesn't work. These are from Yemen. And my general feeling on this is that if you have them, you got to wear them. And I can't really wear them to the office. So once a year I get to wear it here. So pay no attention to this jambalaya. Also, for the golfers in the crowd, apparently there is, in fact, a use for a 2-iron. I'm just saying. Okay, so part of the problem in putting this together is I love history and I just lose myself, and in one of the run-throughs I'd spoken for an hour and hadn't seen the first slide. And so what I've done is thrown all the history essentially to the end in the Q&A, and I'm going to highlight a couple things that you might want to come back and talk about, but I want to make sure we get through the slides, and I've got to get you in there for dinner at 7:30. So we'll jump right in here. We all essentially came from Africa, and there is some thought that maybe there's a different strain in Asia, and Ann Shirless can surely in the Q&A clear us up on that, but essentially we all came from Africa and we migrated. And the way it worked is 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was up here in the highlands of Ethiopia, which is where we started the trip, and then Homo neanderthalis was over here in West Africa. And about, who knows, 300,000 years ago, Neanderthals migrated across the Sinai Peninsula, all over Europe, and you know the famous cave paintings up here in France and Spain. And then 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens came across the Bab el-Mandeb, this little part right here, and at that time the oceans were 200 feet lower. And so instead of 12 miles of water, it was about a mile or two, and you could get on a raft and hop over those. So 50,000 years ago, Homo sapiens comes all the way over here to Australia, up 30,000 up in Siberia, 15,000 years, the land bridge into North and South America. So we all came from here, but a very interesting thing happened. We're not descended from Neanderthals, we're cousins, and we're descended from Homo ergaster. So we're cousins. And what happened to Neanderthals, and the answer most people think, is that sapiens had a unique capacity in the brain, and that was language. And the ability to communicate allowed, within a couple thousand years, again, Ann Shirless can clear us up on this, but about in a couple thousand years, Homo sapiens wiped out every last Neanderthal, and that was the end of them. Africa is bigger than you can wrap your brain around. This is the United States, this is China, this is India, UK, Eastern Europe, Italy, Germany, Spain, and France. It's just absolutely massive, and I'm sure there are a bunch of people here that have been to various places in Africa, and you know what it means. When you think you're just going to hop on a plane and go from here to here, you have another thing coming. So here's the map. Currently, you can't see all the names, but that's the current map.
The Congo should have been the pride of Africa. Over 3 times the size of Texas, with a river capable of producing enough power to light up the entire African continent. Instead, its people are among the poorest in the world, and many are likely to die an unnatural death. They have been the victims of more than 100 years of greed, plunder, and terror. The legacy of a man who had never even gone upriver. King Leopold II of Belgium.
You should purchase as much land as you will be able to obtain without losing 1 minute from all the chiefs from the mouth of the Congo to Stanley Falls. I will send you more people and more material.
So we could talk for hours about Leopold, and should, because it's a very important story. But I would say that in the Q&A we can get back into it. But in my view, he was one of the great monsters of human history. What he did in the Congo was just unspeakable, all the while telling everyone he was doing it as a non-profit to save the Congo natives. It was really something. This is from 1853. Just take away from this that this was an absolutely unexplored area. The Congo is here and the Central African Republic is here. And the big quest at that time was to find the source of the Nile. And famous explorers, so Richard Burton and Henry Stanley and David Livingstone were all in here searching for that. When I say in here, nobody goes in here. Nobody. This is Bantu and various tribes, and it's dangerous. Dangerous animals, dangerous natives, dangerous snakes, dangerous diseases. We all keep hearing about how terrible it was when the Westerners came to the United States in the early days with the Native Americans, and we introduced them to all these things and they all died off. But the reality is, literally, out of every 100 white explorers or traders that came to the coastal area, within a year, 70% of them would be dead of various diseases. It was really inhospitable. So here is the early explorations of Livingstone, and he was a missionary and an explorer, extraordinary man, unlike the person who discovered him, Henry Stanley. I can't even get into that, but not such a great guy. So Stanley discovers David Livingstone up here in Ujiji in Tanzania, and very big deal, but this is where he had gone. Think about this. At that time, these were the places that Livingstone had gone. This is the Congo River, the Niger River, all this kind of stuff. Nobody went there. Nobody. It was just unbelievably adventurous. So another dynamic is religion and how this played out. And this is Islam and Christianity. And it basically is a fault line, and the Central African Republic's right around here. The eastern third is Islamic, and the western two-thirds is Christian. And there have just been all kinds of battles and wars here. Slavery. Can't talk about Africa without talking about slavery. And so we're all familiar with Western slavery. Really in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, the Portuguese were coming down here, harvesting slaves from the black tribes who would go into the inner land and raid slaves and sell them to the white man for mainly rifles, but other things. So this slavery, the Western slavery, a couple 100, 300, 400 years old. Slavery here in the East has been going on for 1,000, 2,000 years. I mean, honestly, the history of civilization is the history of slavery. And so Arab slave traders, mainly Zanzibar and Muscat, Oman, were the main places that slaves were taken all the way east. The most famous slave uprising in the history of human affairs was the Zan revolt in Basra, now in Iraq. At that time it was Mesopotamia, 869. Massive casualties, big uprising, and the Zan is another word for Bantu. All Bantu slaves, natives. So, should spend an hour here, going to spend about 15 seconds. So this is 1914. This is the rush for Africa. It's the beginning of the First World War. Bismarck had had a big conference in 1894. All the rulers, leaders from Europe came, and they basically divided up Africa. What it ended up being is the Brits, the British Empire, is this, I'm colorblind, that's whatever that is, pink. So they are from, let's say, Cairo down to South Africa, and the French are from Dakar, Senegal, all the way over here to French Somaliland, which is Djibouti. So this dynamic, remember Islam, Christianity, focal point Fashoda, Q&A, we can talk about that. We'll talk about Lord Kitchener and big battles here. But this is really the underlying, in the First World War, the Germans had a presence in Lake Tanganyika, and the Brits brought gunboats up here to confront them because the First World War was ramping up, and whoever controlled this would control North Africa, and that was a very big strategic thing in the First World War, as it was in the Second World War with Rommel and Montgomery and Patton. This is very, very important for who controls Europe, because if you control this, it's a very easy hop over to Italy and Sicily. Patton, finally came up through Italy. So, African Queen, awesome movie, just watched it again. Fictional account of something real, which was that the Brits, amazingly, in the beginning of the First World War, brought gunboats from South Africa up the railway as far as they could go, and then they hit jungle. They wanted to get up to Lake Tanganyika. They disassembled the gunboats, carried them with slaves through the jungle, hack, I mean, just unbelievable, to get up to Lake Tanganyika to confront the Germans. I find that anytime Caroline has a machete, I back off, whatever the subject is. Okay, so that's enough of the history. Well, no, I'll come back a little bit, but we're going to Ethiopia to get to the Central African Republic. Bangui, the capital, is here. That's where we'll fly to. This little knob right here is where we're going. It's the most remote corner of the most remote jungle in Africa. We go to Addis Ababa. Remember I said the Bab el-Mandeb, this is where humans first came through here up into Yemen and the rest of the world. So we're going to, here's Haile Selassie. Many of you know that name. Probably Haile Selassie, for a period, was probably the most famous leader in Africa. And this is his coronation in 1930. And he comes from, it is said, a descendant directly of Solomon and Sheba. Solomon and Sheba. And so Sheba is the Sabaean peoples who were in Yemen and Africa and Ethiopia, Abyssinia, let's call it. And the kingdom of Aksum was where she probably came from, in the highlands of Ethiopia. And so, I'll explain this. This is Jamaica, 1962. Smoking dope all day long. Seriously, literally, smoking dope all day long. Haile Selassie plane comes. Door opens. We won't play anymore because this thing goes on for an hour, but he looks out and goes, whoa, jeez, and goes back in the plane, and they had to clear the runway. I mean, these people were beside themselves, in love with him. Why were they in love with him? It turns out that the family name of Haile Selassie is Tafari. The name for a ruler in Ethiopia is Raz. Say that several times. Rastafari, 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 Rastiman. Rastafarianism is from Haile Selassie. They believed that Haile Selassie was the second coming of Jesus Christ. So all you Bob Marley fans, now you have the provenance of where that comes from. Haile Selassie, this is the Jubilee Palace. Caroline and I were there. He was called, is that me? I do sort of emanate sounds from time to time. So he had lions roaming free all over the royal grounds, and his servants would feed them. And sometimes the reverse. But it really was quite something. So we're going to go from Addis Ababa at 7,700 feet up into the highlands at 9,500 feet. And we're in this jitney, 14 of us crammed in there. And we notice this woman. She weighs about 70 pounds, and she has about 70 pounds worth of wood. She gets up. The poverty in Ethiopia is just heart-wrenching. So at 3 a.m., she starts collecting this wood, and she has to walk down 2,000 feet to get down to sell this wood, at best for $2 a day, to feed herself and her family. It's just unbelievable. So here we are at the National Museum of Ethiopia, and who lives in here? Lucy lives in here. So Lucy is the, I think, Anne, is the oldest human ancestor that we found. She apparently lived about 3.2 million years ago. She's a Australopithecus afrensis, and this was a replica because this was on tour in the United States when we were here. She was 3 feet 7 inches tall, 64 pounds. Coffee was invented or started to be used in Ethiopia, big deal here. These are streets in the capital city of Addis Ababa. This is various things, including food that we just couldn't wait to try. So 70% of Addis is Christian, and they're Orthodox Christian. And like nothing you've ever seen, the call to prayer is 7 times a day versus 5 for Islam. And so over these speakers, this call to prayer, and all of these people are moving through, and once they get to these gates, they start kissing the gates, kissing the ground, so they're on their knees, coming up to the church, kissing everything along the way, 7 times a day. So this is a commemoration to the massacre of 30,000 Ethiopians in 1937 by the Italian fascists who had tried to take over Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of only 2 African countries that was never colonized. The fascists were there for a few years and then they were kicked out. The other one, I think, is... what? I don't think, but you may be right. As I always say, my knowledge is a mile wide and a millimeter deep. The other one is not Sierra Leone, but right next to Ghana. Ozzy, you might know, but anyway, we'll come back to that. This is a monster. We're going to talk about a couple monsters. This is Mengistu Haile Mariam. Overthrows Haile Selassie, murders him, and communist thug, oh wait, I repeat myself. So he takes over. This is the Revolutionary Square in Addis Ababa. He takes this red bottle of what looked like blood and smashes it down and exhorts everybody to go out and kill anyone with an education and anyone that has any money. And he unleashed for 10 years the most unbelievable pogrom. We went to a just unbelievably moving museum memorial to this Holocaust that was just, the only one that has ever moved me more is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. It was just unbelievable. Anybody who goes to the third world, these are mattresses. How does he do that? I mean, how would you do that? I guess he's looking for the princess and the pea. So, we're done with Ethiopia. Now we're in the airport in Addis, and we're going to fly to Bangui, the capital of Central African Republic. So that's where we're headed. Bangui, and we're going to go down here. So there really was, Central Africa, really there were no countries until the European powers drew some lines based on what they occupied. So this was Umbaji Shari was what it was called. This is 1906. This is King, I can't remember his name, Benny something like Bangaloo Do or Bop Bop, whatever. Anyway, he had 17 wives, and he traded in slaves, as did everybody in Africa. So when Paris fell in the Second World War, and we know the Vichy government took over in Paris and also established itself in northwest Africa, in Casablanca. And so de Gaulle visited, and so the Free French, de Gaulle, established themselves in Brazzaville, in Congo, right next, the Congo Republic, next to our Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he went up in 1940 to Bangui, and for a brief period, Bangui was the capital of the Free French in the Second World War. I read this book. If you're really interested in Central African Republic, Louisa Lombard, PhD, lived there many years, did research. I can't believe that she did it. This is not a place you want to spend a lot of time in, but she chronicled the violence in the Central African Republic. There is no government. It's a failed state. There's a coup every 27 minutes. And basically, he who has the biggest gun and machete runs the show. We're over here. Here's the Lord's Resistance Army, the child soldiers. These are various countries that want, I mean, it's just an absolute nightmare. So, we're going to fly from Bangui in a little hedge hopper to Bayonga, which is our destination. So we all get in the plane, we strap up, we're ready to go, and the pilot says, we're going to have to get out and move the plane. We're boxed in. So we all get out, and we had to move this plane. Just, I mean, move the plane. And planes don't really want to move if the engines aren't on. So that delayed us a little bit. No photographs. No photographs. We took this as we were leaving. In here was the most Franz Kafka nightmare scenario of customs you can possibly imagine. Basically, it was a long table with 7 big men, and behind them were 10 men, large men in camo with automatic weapons, and you would present your papers, and they were doing this just to kind of stick it to you. They had no interest in processing it. They'd be talking to their friend. He'd finally go like this, and then he'd give it back to you, and he'd say, go there. And this guy fiddles around and fiddles around. He gives it back to you. And any urge you might have to say to one of those guys, why don't you just slide it over there? When you look deeply into their eyes, you realize that wouldn't be a good idea. Okay, so I'm going to forget most of the history except for this one guy. So in 1966, Jean Bedel Bokassa overthrows, I think it was David Dacko, and runs Central African Republic even more horribly than it normally is. And 10 years later, in 76 or so, he dissolves everything and declares himself emperor and becomes emperor for life. And by the way, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, the prime minister at the time, best buddy, would come, because this was a French colony, essentially, came many times to hunt elephant, best buddy, exchanged gifts, all this kind of stuff. This, in 1976, this proceeding, this inauguration, was $20 million, which was as much as the budget to run the country for a year. This crown of diamonds was $2 or $5 million. Anyway, his rule was unbelievably horrific. Torture, maim, kill, 17 wives. Every time he would leave the country, he'd take the most beautiful girl, work his magic, bring her back, she's a wife. He just, you've never read about a more depraved, corrupt man. He had bodies on ice in his basement that he had tortured. Horrible. He made school children buy very expensive uniforms to go to school that were made by his wife's company. And when the children started to squawk about it, he brought his soldiers in, and they took 100 of them and beat them to death in a prison, including him personally. This was just a monster. At his inauguration, it was always rumored that he delved in cannibalism. And famously, whether it's true or not, here he is at his state dinner, and he turned to the French consulate next to him and said, "How did you like the dinner?" He said, "Oh, it was very good." He said, "Good, it was human flesh." So he was ultimately tried in absentia. He got out of the country, they tried him in absentia, and he was death sentence, commuted to life in solitary, commuted to 20 years. Another ruler comes in, commutes it to 10 years, and then they said, you're good to go. So he ultimately got out, went back to Bangui, lived on a pension for the rest of his life, and died at 1996. Okay, so we leave Bangui. Here we are going out over the jungle. This is the most remote jungle in Africa. I just can't tell you. There is just nothing there. There is a Jeep road. It would take 2 days in a Jeep these roads are ridiculous, to get a fairly short distance. Here we are coming into Bayonga. Down here lives the Goliath tigerfish, if any of you are fishermen. And we had 2 guys that brought tackle to try to catch the Goliath tigerfish. I will say that the number of Goliath tigerfish in that river before we came, a bunch. The number of Goliath tigerfish when we left, the same bunch. So here's Bayonga. We're entering a traffic pattern to the metropolitan landing strip. We have landed. This is our proprietor of the Sangha Lodge, Rod Cassidy, extraordinary man. We'll talk more about him. This is Angelique Todd. She ran the Gorilla Project that we're going to be involved in. That's her daughter, Poppy. This is Angela Turcalo, who runs the Cornell University / World Wildlife 25-year, it was her project for 25 years, studying the forest elephants, which we're going to see. We are her guest. This is the operations manager, William, a wonderful guy. That's Rod. So we're arriving. This is our front stoop. This is the Sangha River where the Goliath tigerfish live. So, to get up into the lodge, there's a little floating bridge. You get in there and then you pull the rope to get over there. Amazing place. I just can't describe to you how thick this jungle is. I mean, this is a clearing, but right outside there it's machete all the way. That is Shay Wentling. That's Caroline and me. This is Shay Wentling. This is the bungalow, the current, well, then president, who was overthrown 5 months after we left. But at the time it was Pierre Bozizi. And you could tell because he had a satellite dish that was very big. And when we got there and I learned that, I thought, this is awesome. Because if the president, he wasn't there when we were there, but I just thought, I'd pack some weight and maybe he'll come, and if he comes, he'll come with men with automatic weapons, and then that's a good thing. We'll have those. And then I thought, that could be a bad thing. If there's a coup, we're going to be right next to the guy that they're going to kill. This was the dining hall, bar, and a deck that we sat out on every night and thought big thoughts. This. So this guy bought this place as it was a failed hunting lodge. And he bought it in 2008. I mean, obviously there's great hunting here. He wants nothing to do with guns. He is a birder, a world-class birder, and has done birding trips all over Central and South America and in China and all over the world. He's really quite a knowledgeable guy. This guy, Jack Wheeler, is a bird of a different sort, and they just didn't hit it off. And so for the first 2 days, you could just see, I mean, we're paying customers, so Rod isn't going to give us a hard time, but you could see that he and Jack really weren't hitting it off. This is our sunset. So what we discovered a couple days later is that Jack had fought with Joseph Savimbi in Angola in the late 80s against a Soviet-backed regime. And that came out in conversation, and Rod said, what? 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 And he said, I fought with Savimbi in Angola against that same regime, and it turned out they were both there, roughly the same time, didn't know each other. But it was like the relationship just bloomed. They were like, yeah, dude, you and me. So here's our water system. This collects rainwater, comes down this little line, goes into a big cauldron on a charcoal fire all day, and that's how we had hot water. There's the compound. There's Wentling. Those are our neighbors, Mike and Chuck. On day 2, they both came down with an intestinal thing, and we never saw them for 2 days, and it was the most horrific thing. The bathrooms in here aren't really bathrooms the way you would think a bathroom is. And to go through that for 2 days, not be able to eat anything, was really horrific. So that's the bar again. So really, really dense, like Tarzan dense. Like So everything is up on these stilts, and it's up there for a very good reason. There are all kinds of creepy crawly things, snakes and bugs and just, you know, way more than we're used to here. And they're still going to get in, but you want to at least have some defense. Here is the marital bed of Caroline and Tom Wentling. It's wonderful. And what happens is that these creepy crawly, these huge spiders just hang up here, and that's why you're under this thing, because they would drop down. And they just sit there, and they're looking at you, and they have red eyes, and at night you can see they're just looking at you. And the other thing is, it's dark. You don't really have any light. We just had a little flashlight. So if you're going to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, you really have no idea what's crawling around down here. So at 3 a.m. the first night, Caroline is sound asleep, and I start hearing this rustling of the bushes. And not just rustling, but I mean rustling of the brush. And long story short, I realize that 1 and maybe 2 elephants are right there. And what kills you in Africa, in this part of Africa, are elephants. These are forest elephants. When you're in the bush, there could be an elephant right there and you wouldn't see it. It's not like in the savannah. I don't know what to do. I mean, and elephants make the most disgusting noises. I'll leave it at that. But I knew he was right out here. And I also know from experience that if I did this to Caroline, she would say, "What?" And when she did that, I knew the pachyderm would just come right through the wall there. So I just sort of sat, stewed in my juices, and couldn't figure out what to do. So the next morning, of course, Caroline announced to the group what I was afraid of. And so all night long, essentially for the next couple of nights, I was on guard. Because I had done my research, and I know there are bad people with bad things that will do bad things. And by the way, early on I said to Rod, Rod, what kind of hardware do you have here just in case things got a little funky? He said, "Oh, no, we don't have any guns here. This is a bird watching operation." So I had a bad back at the time, and one of the guys was experimenting with some novel new kind of TENS unit, and I was wearing it right here, and it had 2 little flashing red lights. And so all night long, I would just dart here. And Carol, you just see these flashing red lights all night. And so she announced, of course, at breakfast the next day that we could all breathe freely because Tom was the tip of the spear, he was on point, and while everybody else was sleeping, he was on guard. That tip of the spear, by the end of the trip, morphed into tip of the toothpick. I think that was a term of respect and honor, but anyway. So I was banished to that little cot. Jack Wheeler said the next day, "Caroline, just throw him out of the bed and put him in that little cot." Okay, the next morning, these guys came back, and normally you would never see them in the daylight, but these, I'm sure that's the one that was right outside our well-fortified stockade. This is the path that Horton came listening for a who or a Tom. Okay, we had a very well-stocked bar. The lights, the electricity doesn't come on until 7 o'clock at night, so luckily the bar worked. Here's where we ate all our meals, and the food was generally good, but whenever we would say, "What is it?" it was always chicken or beef. Chicken or beef. We were there for 7 days. We never saw a chicken, and we never saw a cow, not one. The kitchen was another hut right over here. Not one person ever looked in that kitchen hut because that was it. That was the food, and none of us had the stomach to actually see what it was we were eating. I will say it was good, but I have no idea what it was. So, really interesting story. Louis Sarno, Google this guy when you get home. Long story short, he was an MIT, I think, or some other fancy school music and math guy, and he was dating this woman from Denmark or something, and they broke up, and he chucked it all, sold everything he had. He was from New Jersey, and he got on an airplane and flew to Bangui he wanted to record the sounds of the jungle and the sounds of the Baka pygmies. So he had recording gear. And he walked by himself from Bangui. Remember when I showed you that jungle? He walked by himself to Bayanga, recording the sounds of the jungle. He married a Baka pygmy. We'll see the pygmies in a second. This is their son. NPR was so impressed with these jungle sounds, they flew him and his pygmy wife and Samadhi to New York City for a recording session. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to take a caveman and bring them back into the modern era? I'm quite serious about this. The Baka pygmies are Stone Age pygmies, completely insulated from civilization. Imagine what it must have been like for them to get on a jet, fly across the ocean, and come to the skyscrapers in Manhattan. It's just an amazing story. He essentially became the mayor of Bakaville, the Baka village. We'll look at that in a second. Here is Rod. Right after this, he had malaria. Everybody there has malaria, and he came down with just a horrible bout, and we didn't see him for 3 days. So here's the Sangha River. Here's the Goliath tigerfish. This is not from our trip. You can find this on the internet, but never came close to a Goliath tigerfish. So here's our mass transportation up and down to Bayanga. Only bottled water everywhere we went, as you can see. There's the cocktail cruiser. Bottled water. Ah! Nice. Here? Yes. All right.
Very good.
That's what happens when you drink too much bottled water. These guys served rum and tonics every time we got in the cruiser. Why don't they sit down? There are tiger Goliath fish in here, Goliath tigerfish. Here's Bayanga. This was operations manager of Sangha Lodge. He was a wonderful guy. Notice this dress. This is Francois Bozizi, the president. All the women would wear the dress. All the curtains were that. Except driving in the Republic, you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. You want to show, yeah, dude, I'm with you. So here's a store. Notice these. I love this. Dustbins. The floors are all dirt. What are you going to do with a dustbin? So, this was the food store. Here's some shellfish. These are bugs. Many different kinds of bugs. If this was a video, you'd see them squirming. These guys could not get enough of me. They were hanging on my every word. Bottled water. Here's the school. We knew we were covered if anything happened medically. We were government work. So here we are in a little village, I get Bayanga, and there was one little scene that happened here, and that is that Jerry, I'm not going to give any last names, is a Marine and a wonderful guy, and he travels with Jack all over the world, and there were some young sort of toughs, and they started, I was kind of observing this, and they were starting to, a situation was developing, and just like a Marine, everybody else is sort of backing away, and Jerry just has this big, you know what, eating grin, and just comes right up in their face. Hey, boys, what's going on here? And they back right away. I don't know that that's the smartest thing to do in the Central African Republic, but this was Lawrence, our guide. He was wonderful. That's his daughter. Sit down, for God's sakes. So here are Baka pygmy guides for our gorilla experience. I'm sorry, for the elephant experience. So we're about to walk 45 minutes through the dense jungle where the elephants live to get to the raised observation deck. So here we go, Indy on point. This is a terrible picture from above, but here's what it is. So this was an old, defunct volcano, and all these minerals that were thrown up from the center of the earth, the animals come from all over, out of this dense jungle, through which we must go back to the Sangha Lodge. And they come here all day long, sucking up these minerals. So that's Jack and Angela Turcalo. I know it's in here somewhere. This is as good as it gets for these guys. They just never move. And it was fascinating watching them. These are forest buffalo. They literally never moved. They just stood, they were there all day long. These are giant hogs. There were, can't see it here, but there were a bunch of monkeys back there at one point. Forest buffalo. It's about time to go home. This guy didn't like that. So they're fixing to go home, and we got a fix to go home. And I just kept wondering how that's going to work. Them in the jungle and us in the jungle. This is a bongo. If any of you are hunters, a bongo, there are only 700 left in the world. It's a prized hunting trophy. That's what they would have been hunting in the Sangha Lodge before it went belly up. Interestingly, you can hunt these in Texas at the Oxtail Ranch, $35,000 to hunt for a bongo. More elephants. Angela. She was thrilled to be standing next to me. So much about you, Tom. These are Sitatunga. So this is what we did all day long. I got a little antsy after a while. Caroline and Sharon just were in heaven. They loved every minute of it. And you can tell, I mean, Caroline can tell you about this, but she knew, Angela, every single elephant. She knew them by name. She knew all about them. So that was Girl in Heaven. I, on the other hand, all I could think about was this, and I couldn't figure that out. So what happened was we had to be ushered back in two groups of 5 or 6, and the first group left, and it took an hour, hour and a half, and then they would come back and get us, and it turned out the guides had told us all along, if you ever come upon an elephant, and particularly a bull, do not move. Stay absolutely stationary. Does everybody understand that? The guide saying this? Yes, yes. So this group came upon an area where across some water was a bull, and he looked at him and started making a lot of noise. And you know what the guides did? Run! And so this guy, Denham, he's the guy that made the 10s for me. Entrepreneur, world traveler, one of the most impressive people Caroline and I have ever met. He rose to the occasion on that first group, got everybody settled down, and somehow led them out of danger. This guy, not so much. So now, another day, we're going to see the gorillas. And so tickets, please. Now, mind you, we're in the middle of the jungle. This is not gorillas at the Pittsburgh Zoo. So we're going to trek for them hours into the jungle. So here's part of our crew, father and son. This is the guy who went up to the young toughs. So here we are getting into the gorilla area. Here are some of our trackers and guides. Gorilla whisperers. She was wonderful. Sharon was a nurse by training, and believe me, she had her hands full with our crew. This woman, Shan, had broken her ankle about 2 or 3 months before. Why she came on this trip is a mystery to all of us. She had all kinds of metal in there, and it became a problem. She was a trooper, but can't imagine why she did that. There it is. This Evelyn was a German that happened to be working with the gorilla trackers, and she'd been living there as a project for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months, or maybe a year. And every day, I mean, she lived in Bayonga. And I could no more imagine that than fly. I mean, she lived in Bayonga. So Caroline was so concerned that she got her email, and when we got back to civilization, Caroline emailed her parents and said, she's okay, she really looks good, it's all good. So what happens is, the gorilla are out there in the wild, and they acclimate them to humans. In other words, the trackers will track a family for 6 months or a year and just stay their distance until they get used to a human being. And then and only then will they take people like us and they stage you up, and will only let 2 or 3 go up with the trackers. And you get, I mean, literally from here to that wall to the gorilla. It's kind of hit and miss. So here we are. We've been staged up in 2 or 3. This is a 600-pound silverback gorilla, and he's from here to the wall. Now, they are not carnivorous. They're vegetarians, and they eat all day long because they're eating those leaves because he's 600 pounds. So you're not dinner. On the other hand, if he got mad or spooked or whatever, I figured that all I had to do was be faster than the slowest person in our group, which was Shan. So I felt a little better after that. Here he is. He's a big boy. And so what happens is he's eating, and then when your group comes up and you're standing there, he just goes like this, and he just kind of looks at you. These were our trackers. They were just unbelievable. The gnats here were unbelievable. You can see some around his face. They were just swarming all the time. This is Mrs. Gorilla. Sharon was great, but of course what they said is never take pictures. Do not let the flash go. She forgot, took her first picture. The flash goes like this. And it was luckily all was well. That's Mrs. Gorilla. Lady, for heaven's sakes. All right, so we're done with the gorillas. It actually went on for another day. We had some great video of it. I, of course, erased the video on Caroline's Day with the gorillas that didn't go very well. Hi, guys. So we're going back to the lodge. Here's a Baka village. Again, these are Stone Age Baka pygmies. We're all about nature, right? We want to get back to nature. We want to go to Whole Foods, everything organic, no chemicals, live the way God intended us to live. There's Tarzan. So this is Louis Sarno, the guy I told you about, who left everything, married a Baka, lives in a Baka village. Oh wait, I forgot. Until he died of hepatitis, he had some strain of hepatitis. He had malaria. He had several different things. You can't really see it here, but he was almost bright orange. Baka life expectancy 37, 40 years. I mean, this is back to nature. Very cool girl. I've noticed, regardless of culture, that men like to walk around naked and women don't pay much attention to it. And, Jack has been doing this kind of thing since he was 15 in the Amazon and then 16 in Africa, but it's just extraordinary to think how he has spent his life. This guy's got some weed here, some dope. Everybody here is smoking marijuana all the time. What could possibly go wrong? That's a machete, perilously close to his whatever, but he obviously is comfortable with it. He knows how to use it, so it's all right. So now we're going to take the Baka hunting in our cars. The Baka, to hunt, have to walk miles and miles down these roads and then turn off and hack into the jungle. I mean, this is hacked every step. So the notion, they never get this. There are not a lot of tourists here. That they're going to get a ride several miles in a pickup truck is a really, really big deal. And so it was pandemonium, me, and fighting and tears, and very big deal. And so off we go, a couple truckloads full of Baka. The women do all the work here. I never saw a guy doing much in the way of work, but these are nets that they weave out of vines, and then they're going to lay some snares. So here they are, we go. So a couple miles down the road, get out. Somebody says, let's try in here. Hack, hack, hack. Within 5 minutes, it is so dense, you could never find your way out. I could have been in there the rest of my life if there wasn't somebody to lead me out. There's no way. You can't see anything up here. There's no orientation. So they string these, and then the women get back about 30 yards, and they start screaming and yelling and beating things, and they drive the prey into these nets. And the prey are little things. Porcupine, blue diaper, which is a little antelope. And then they catch it. And of course, back to nature, she's beating its brains out with her fist. Here it is. She's holding it down, but she doesn't really have to, because as soon as she grabs it, she breaks both front legs, so it can't go anywhere. So now they've got her blue diaper. There it is, and they're about to apportion it. And when I say nothing goes to waste, there's not a single thing you're looking at that isn't eaten. I mean, including the nose and the ear and everything. And it's chopped up right there. And there's a very big hierarchy among the village as to who gets what part. And it has to do with where your standing is, and also, were you on the last hunt? Did you miss a hunt? All that kind of stuff. It's a very, very big deal. That's a porcupine. That's a porcupine. That's a bee. So there were these vines everywhere, and you just take a machete, go like that. You're not going to die of thirst in a tropical rainforest. Okay, so now we're loading back up to leave. Then they showed us some native remedies. So for a earache, they I can't remember what it was. Caroline knows, but they put it in his ear. Now they're going to build a traditional hut that they live in both in the village, and then they strike out for 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe 2 months into the jungle to hunt. And they build these things. REI, you could put some notes here. That's what it ends up looking like. That's what they live in the Baka village, and that's what they live in the forest. Bunch of naked.
They had one of those at Phipps Conservatory not too long ago because they were featured in that area in the world. And so they actually had a hut like that.
Naked male butterflies strutting in front of 2 females. Okay, so after a successful hunt, I mean, this is a big deal, and this was a good take for them. So the Baka ladies came a-calling that night to Sangha Lodge and did a dance for us. And this was really, truly a very big deal. And they were very excited. Lots of dancing. You go, girl. Shake your booty. I mean, baby. It's a baby. So, the next night, we go back to the Baka village, and they put on a jingi dance. And somebody said, oh, they must do this for all the tourists. This is the most important thing in the Baka culture. The Baka are animists, and they believe that there are spirits in everything. And the 2 most important spirits are the Lumba, don't know what that is, and the jingi. And the jingi presides over a young male becoming a man and all different kinds of things. But I can tell you that this was just huge. I will say again, everybody's high on marijuana, so it's, you know, it's a big deal, but it's very important to them. This is their culture. So put the child to bed. This goes on all night. You can, I mean, those of you that were at Woodstock will recognize those looks. Lots of music, lots of dancing. There were all these little squigglies. Caroline and I have been looking at these, and we're just certain that these were spirits. Until Nathan said, no, those aren't spirits. That's a slow exposure lens you got. There's the jingi. Looks goofy to us. It's a very big deal to them. I think we'll blend right in with these people, no problem. I was going to tell them that I played 3rd ukulele in a 3-man ukulele band in 6th grade, but I didn't want to upstage what was going on here. These are my peeps. It's the only time in my life I've towered over everybody. It's really good. There's Lewis. More dancing. I don't know what that was. I think it was directed at me. Like children everywhere, he's so embarrassed with his mother. Come on. That's the end of the trip. So now we're going to get on these airplanes, and we had to have 2 planes. So it was 2 shifts, and we drew straws. And the first group got away, and they were feeling pretty snarky and pleased with themselves. And we, on the other hand, had to stay back and drink more bottled water. And so we hung here for about an hour and a half because we knew that being first, they'd be back in that Franz Kafka hellhole of the Bangui customs with the big guys with automatic weapons, and we were kind of having fun here. So there's Rod and his son Alon and William and one of the staff. How about this? 007. De James Bond. Here's our crew waiting for our buggy. Angelique Todd ran the Guerrilla Project here. No thumb there. So when she was 25, she was running the Chimpanzee Project somewhere in Britain. And she stood next to the cage like this, and a chimp reached out, grabbed her hand, bit off her finger, and mauled us pretty badly. Careful with chimps. And that is our chariot. And away we go. And there is the airport. So I'm going to close here and just say that we can take questions. What I used, if you're at all interested in Africa, this is by far and away the Bible. It's called The Fate of Africa by Martin Meredith. He went to Oxford. He was a journalist. He spent 50 years traveling and writing about Africa. I've read this twice. It's 700 pages. It is absolutely magisterial. You could use it as a history of Africa, or you could say, oh, I'm going to this country. Let me learn everything about that country. It's really quite something. King Leopold's Ghost. We could talk about this if you like, but Leopold was really a monster. Of course, you can't talk about the Congo without Joseph Conrad and Heart of Darkness. This is the best account that I've seen of the horrific wars in the Congo in the 90s and early 2000s. They're still essentially going on, but we've all seen Hotel Rwanda, and we have some idea of the Hutus and Tutsis. What this shows you is that it's been non-stop slaughter, essentially forever, but in the 90s and early 2000s, just horrific. And when you think about, how many people saw Hotel Rwanda or read it? Okay, so, you know, we're all focused on the Tutsi who were slaughtered by the genocidaires, the Hutus, right? And then Paul Kagame comes in at the end and rescues them and cleans everything up. But that's this lens. And then when you go like this, you realize that before that, the Tutsis had done the same thing to the Hutus, and afterwards, it's a never-ending battle. And in the north of the Congo and the east of the Congo, it is just horrific slaughter. That was from the movie and the book. By the way, in the Cold War, Africa was an absolute chessboard. And broadly speaking, the Warsaw Pact, the Soviet Union, was on the east, and the West was more in the west. And Che Guevara, a monster. It always, I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I see college kids with a shirt that says Che. This is a homicidal monster maniac. Anyway, he took a bunch of Cubans in 1965 and wanted to knock out the essentially the Congolese in the east part of the Congo, and was about to succeed until this guy, James Hawes, took a bunch of SEALs and Cubans that were thrown out of Cuba who wanted to go back in the fight, and he took them over to Lake Tanganyika, where Che was, and basically kicked Che's butt out of Africa. And Che, if you've read any of his memoirs, left in disgrace. It was an utter disaster for him.
And that's all, folks.
If one wants to have a trip like this, how do you do it?
So now that you've asked, I'm going to give you Jack Miller's bio. Half of you will be able to recite it, as you've heard me say it so many times. Half of you have no idea what we're talking about. So the answer to that question is, Jack Wheeler is the youngest Eagle Scout ever at 12, climbed the Matterhorn at 14, at 15 lived with an Amazon head shrinking tribe, at 16 has 3 first contacts with African tribes, went to Vietnam at the age of 17 in the early 60s, before the war heated up, shot a Bengal tiger that had eaten 20 Hmong villagers. They thought he was a pretty cool dude. So he stayed for 2 years. He started the Saigon Cinnamon Trading Company. He swam the Hellespont, which is the Dardanelles Straits, some of the most treacherous water there is, if you remember the ancient myth of Leander. He's in the Guinness World Book for the first free-fall parachute jump over the North Pole. He's been back 21 times. He's a PhD in Aristotelian philosophy from USC. How many people have seen, in 1973, he felt that he and only he knew how Hannibal brought elephants over the Alps. With his fiancée at the time, they were in Germany, and she knew a circus master, and they talked the circus master out of 2 elephants. And they took these elephants over the Alps, and he's convinced that he found the route. If you Google hard enough, it's not easy to find, but you will get to a New York Times article that talks about it, and he will tell you don't try this at home. It was the most miserable experience of my life. But anyway, so let me just finish and then I'll get to your question. So Charlie Wilson's War. Who's seen or read that? Okay, awesome story. So Charlie Wilson was the best man in Jack's wedding. And long before Charlie could spell Afghanistan, he took Charlie into Afghanistan. And then Jack, actually before he brought Charlie, he flew to Peshawar with a photograph of the lead Mujahideen who was fighting the Soviets. And he walked the streets of Peshawar saying, does anybody know where I can find this guy? And he ended up 100 miles up in the mountains and met with the Mujahideen and said, dude, I can help you. I can get you money and Stinger missiles. I can help you. And the reason I can help you is you think you're fighting the Russians by yourself. But actually, this is an evil empire that is expanding, and there are friction points for all of these countries that they're just gobbling up, whether it's the Sandinistas or Angola or whatever. And I think the way to defeat the Soviet Union, from the time Jack was 15, all he's ever, we have to have dreams. Jack's dream was to destroy the Soviet Union. And in a very real sense, I would say that he did. He certainly played a part in it because he went to the Sandinistas, the Contras fighting the Sandinistas. He went to Joseph Savimbi in Angola. He went to Mozambique, and in every case, he talked with the people fighting the Soviet Union. Then he went back, met with Ronald Reagan, who was a family's friend of his father's. Jack was president of the College Republicans for Reagan, and met with Jack. He met with Ronald Reagan, Bill Casey, head of the CIA at the time, Dana Rohrabacher, and Charlie Wilson, and sketched out this idea, and Reagan bought it. And Jack would be the first to tell you there were plenty of other people talking about the same thing, but Jack certainly was one of the architects. Long-winded answer. So Jack has been doing adventure travel for 40 years. And I met him when I was on the board of Ellis School, and we wanted to bring him in to give a talk. We actually ended up doing the talk up here, and we became friends. And I don't know, Caroline and I have done maybe 5 trips with him. I think David and Lilla Hellman have now done more Wheeler trips than we have. And we're all going, by the way, there are 10 of us going to, have I already said this? I can't remember. No. Okay, so in May of next year, we're doing the 5 stands of Central Asia. And let me just say that we had dinner with Carrie North at the Clam Bake, and the subject came up, and I said, who here at the table can name the 5 stands, knowing no one could? And Carrie said, I can. Kyrgyzstan, not Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. She nailed it right off the bat. So there are 10 of us going on that trip. So the Unkovics, the Lascaux, the Wentlings, the Roberts, and the Hillmans, David and Will. So we're going in May. The trip is, I'm not selling the trip, it's full. I mean, there are 10. There could be 12, but we don't need 12, but there is room for 2 more. So you can do these trips with Jack. And Jack's kids are now involved. You met Brandon last year at the Kurdistan talk, and he's just an awesome guy.
And we just did Israel.
We did Israel with him. He was absolutely magnificent in Israel.
How many were in your group
Here,
on this trip?
on this trip, I would say 10, maybe a little more.
Does Jack have parents?
I know.
Let's let kids do this.
Totally. Jack's father, how about this? Jack's father, they were in Los Angeles, and he was a very big sort of, knew everybody, and he was sort of a, I don't know what he was, a journalist, sort of friend of the stars, and when Jack Parr retired from The Tonight Show, which at the time was filmed in New York, they asked Jack's dad, would you like to succeed? And he didn't want to move the family, so he turned that down. Obviously, Jack's dad, parents, enabled this. How does a 12-year-old get to climb the Matterhorn? 12-year-old was the youngest Eagle Scout. 14 was the Matterhorn. But his dad, made it happen. But let's be fair, dads and moms can make a lot of things available, but who actually does it? So I've never met anybody like him. He is absolutely brilliant. He's got close to a photographic memory as a history student. One of the advantages of traveling with him is it's just, and he's not pontificating, I don't mean that, but you ask him a question if you're on a bus going from one place to another, and you just cannot, how did you know that? I'll give you one more quick story. So one time he was leading a group across the steppes in Mongolia, around Mongolia. And they're in a bunch of Land Rovers, and they have Chinese drivers. And they're going along, and Jack sees up on the ridge these warriors on horses, and bandoliers, and guns and stuff. And Jack says, "Stop the car! Go up there!" And the Chinese drivers knew these guys. They're very distinctive. They have this red head cloth that they weave in their hair. And they're, no, we're not going there. He said, "No, go up there. I'm telling you, go up there." They won't do it. So Jack says, "Stop the car." He gets out, walks across the plain, up into the foothills, comes up on this band of warriors on horses, snorting and all this kind of stuff, and weapons, and he reaches in here and he pulls out a deck of cards of the Dalai Lama. And he goes, "Dalai Lama," and they all go, the warriors go, "Oh, Dalai Lama, Dalai Lama!" And get off their horses, put down the little rugs, and they serve green tea. And Jack kind of goes like this and says, "Come on." So it's just amazing. And those of you that have seen him speak up here, the very first time he talked, it was just a big map here, and that was great. But now we do it with Google Earth. And so when he's talking, you can say, "Well, what about this?" Or if he'll say, "Let me just show you where this is," and you can zoom in. And I've never met anybody like him. He's an extraordinary guy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So when you were, what made you want to go there? And when you were leaving, were you sorry you were leaving or glad to be getting out?
So Jack's brochures are always, like all brochures, you know, the actual thing is not exactly what was in the brochure. Not that he's not hype. I don't mean that. I mean, in his trips, you never know what's going to happen. And here's what he thinks he's going to do, but things don't work out. But I took my first trip with him to Kurdistan in 2008, and it changed my life. I looked at the brochure for this. I just thought, amazing. And then I said to Caroline, knowing that she was going to DK the deal, I said, "What do you think about this?" And she said, "I'm in." Was this your first? I think it was. I can't remember. But, yeah, in any event, all of his trips are unique. It's 5-star to the extent that there's 5-star where you're going. You stay in the nicest thing that there is there. You have to be prepared for the one thing that you really wanted to do. Let me just say this. In Israel, a 90-year-old woman was on the trip. Now, Israel is Israel, right? It's not the third world. 94. And the very first morning, I'm first one up, I'm down in the breakfast thing, and I see this woman like this. And I just was looking at her, and then Caroline came down and said, "Do you think she's on our trip?" We were all just accumulating. And so I went over, and sure enough. So, long story short, part of the draw for all of us was we were going to go train, have a day of training with some elite Israeli defense group and shoot awesome guns and learn about self-defense. And basically everybody on the trip was there for it. Well, the 94-year-old had to go to the bathroom on the way there, and everything was timed like this. And again, long story short, we missed that appointment. And we had a window.
And we sent her home.
Yeah, and ultimately, we sent her home. So she was really struggling, and I took it on myself to be her guardian, and she was on my arm, and we were walking down this thing, and I dropped her. I mean, we were going down these stairs, and I was the only one that was doing this, but here's what happens. If somebody's on your arm, if they fall back this way, you can't get to them, right? She's here, and you okay? She goes that way. So anyway, she fell. She fractured her ankle, and it was very bad. It was very bad. But we did. So, my point is, most of the people on that trip were there for that Israeli Defense Force thing, and that did not happen. Yeah.
Tom, I think you've done us all a great service. We do not have to go to Central Africa. We do not have to book a trip. And my question is, what's for dinner, chicken or beef?
Frank, look at the kitchen. Anything else?
Tom, what's the newsletter thing?
Oh, yeah. So if you want to follow, if you just want to read him, his newsletter is tothepointnews.com. If you just do tothepoint.com, you won't get it. Tothepointnews.com. Okay, caveat emptor. This is a very right-wing guy. A great guy, obviously one of a kind. But if you'll read things that you wouldn't normally read in your day-to-day, whatever. So just know that. And so when you go there, there's a public free thing, and you can read some selected articles. And then if you want to subscribe, I think it's $99 a year. And he writes stuff weekly, and other contributors write there. Some of the stuff's just awesome. Some of it is, you know, what the hell is this? But all in all, I would say that website. Oh, I'll close it by saying this, unless somebody else has a question. I got involved because during the 80s, when the Russians were in Afghanistan, there was an investment letter called Strategic Investments by Lord Rees Mogg and Sir Davidson or something. And there was a periodic byline in there from Jack Wheeler, and it was Behind the Lines with Jack Wheeler. And I couldn't wait for that thing to come out. And I would read it, and I just, who is this guy from Kabul with the Russians in there obliterating towns? And the stuff he was saying was like nothing I'd ever read before. So I just became a kind of a junkie for him. And then I got this idea when I was on the board at Ellis that we should bring him in and have him give a speech. Indiana Jones comes to Ellis, teaches a couple classes in the morning, and then a big fundraising talk at night. Didn't work out for a variety of reasons, so we moved it up here, and it was awesome.
What did they trade with? All they take dollars?
Who?
The Central African Republic.
CFA. It's called CFA. I'm not sure really what that is. But
They couldn't use credit cards anymore.
I think we did sell our bill. Nothing in Bayonga. I was just thinking.
Like if you want a beer, what do you?
It was all on our hotel tab, and we did use a credit card to settle up at the end. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you all very much.